It's a great time to have a PS3 if you're into top-down shooters. Last year, Rising Star Games brought us Under Defeat HD, an in-your-face vertical shmup from the ever-awesome G-Rev. Now it's UFO Interactive's turn, bringing even more PlayStation G-Rev goodness to Western shores with Mamorukun Curse, exclusively via the PlayStation Network. And, believe it or not, there are a lot of parallels between this and G-Rev's 2005 Naomi Hilo-based outing.
Known as Mamorukun wa Noro Arete Shimata in Japan, it was originally released to arcades on Naomi hardware in 2008, and later released to retail on Xbox 360 with its original Tate aspect ratio. It later got a port on PlayStation 3 with various enhancements, and of course trophy support, as well as the additional wide-hand moniker to its title. The exclusive additions to this release include special widescreen HD support, extra modes, and DLC characters right off the bat.
And, like Under Defeat HD, it's the PS3 version that's getting the Western release, albeit without the limited physical release that Under Defeat enjoyed. Nonetheless, Mamorukun Curse is a game that shmuppers should be looking into, so let's take a closer look. In Mamorukun Curse, the story follows the titular Mamoru, who, after a split-second series of unfortunate events, comes to and finds himself amongst a group of total strangers. This group has found themselves in a strange land, having lost their memories. As it turns out, it's the Netherworld, and they've been assembled to restore balance to the spirit world with the help of their newly acquired spirit familiars.
With 7 characters to choose from, each with their own specific fire pattern and option patterns, there's a good amount of choice to be had here. Each character also has a quick descriptor that shows what characters are better for new players and which are more advanced for seasoned shmuppers.
When it comes to the actual gameplay, Mamorukun Curse might look a bit familiar to some of you viewers out there. After all, it has very similar look and feel to the titles Pocky and Rocky, which we took a look at back in episode 47. Since G-Rev was founded by ex-Taito employees, this is no real surprise. There's even a heart gauge in place of traditional lives. But the overall flavor and stage design is much closer to a traditional Tate shooting game, even if the stage doesn't auto-scroll. The fire patterns can get pretty dense, at times straight up Danmaku style, especially with a higher rank, and like a bullet hell shooter, your hitbox is quite tiny, just a small ghostly flame at your character's core.
Players move their characters with typical 8-way control and, by default, fire is dependent on the direction the chosen character is facing as they move. In this respect, the default control scheme is very similar to G-Rev's Under Defeat, especially since your fire direction locks as long as the button is pressed. But just like Under Defeat HD, a twin-stick mode is also included, allowing movement and firing direction to be controlled independently of each other.
And just like in Under Defeat HD, it feels and works an awful lot better than the original controls that Mamorukun boasts, perhaps even with a bit more flexibility. Shots can actually be fired in a full 180-degree arc, with some option shots even homing or locking on in 360 degrees. These shots can be upgraded by collecting power-up icons, which also add spirit options to boost your firepower.
But the main hook to the game revolves around the use of a special chargeable shot called the Curse Shot. The longer it is charged, the faster it moves and the further it goes. Additionally, the Curse field will be larger or smaller when it connects, but the Curse Shot can actually be used in a couple of different ways.
Primarily, a curse shot would be fired at larger enemies, cursing them and making them stronger, but resulting in more bonus points as a result. Any smaller enemies that pass through the area affected by the curse are also cursed and drop a number of bonus pickups as well. Versus smaller enemies though, entire chains or groups can be taken out with a fully charged shot, as well as static stage elements.
It's also possible to curse yourself. By walking into a placed field, your character will take on the curse and get boosted power that's great for taking out even the largest enemies really efficiently. However, you will get far fewer bonus drops. As a penalty though, your curse gauge will need to cool down before it can be used again.
Another important function of the curse shot is how it clears away bullets once the gauge depletes. Stage progression is also pretty neat in Mamorukun. The first thing you need to remember is that you're on a timer. You have 5 minutes of active time to get through the game in arcade mode, which is often replenished slightly by destroying certain enemies and treasure boxes and clearing stages efficiently. Finding the fastest route and the most efficient use of curse shots helps in keeping your time used to a minimum. If the timer runs too low, a special final stage is triggered and a different ending is obtained.
Players have a choice as to which stage they want to take on, both starting out and between each stage. As stages are completed, players also have the option to fight cleared bosses with boosted power for bigger time bonuses, which can be a big help. The more side missions are cleared, the higher the rank goes though, so things can get pretty challenging. Even more challenging are some of the Pocky and Rocky style branching paths throughout many of these stages, which often have much more dense enemy opposition.
Then there's the new Netherworld Adventures mode, which is a widescreen mission-based mode which has a number of challenges or courses for players to sink their chops into, not to mention remix music tracks. In this mode, instead of a life stock, you select a team of characters which represent a life. Extends allow for fallen characters to be rotated in again. While there's a lot to do here, it can often feel a bit repetitive. And there's no standard stage progression like arcade mode or story mode. Still, this mode contains the most challenging stages in the game, so veterans should enjoy it.
Speaking of story mode, this version of Mamorukun is very much like the arcade mode, with a more fleshed out story between a predetermined set of stages, complete with voice acting. It's yet another way to play Mamorukun and adds that small, yet welcome, layer of longevity to the package. All in all, the gameplay comes together really well, and while some of the more intense bullet patterns might be a little bit tricky to navigate at times, it's still very, very manageable and fun to boot.
The scoring in Mamorukun is simple but fun. Colorful candy bonus drops are the core scoring element outside of enemy kills, and they can be obtained in a few different ways. Mainly, treasure boxes will drop a bunch of candy, but as stated before, curse enemies are the key to getting the biggest bonuses.
Using a curse field lobbed onto the playfield is great for getting a ton of extra bonus candies in a short amount of time, especially with higher rank. Defeating larger enemies when they have flooded the screen with bullets can also yield an enormous candy bonus. All of your candy goes into a combo count, which, if you're quick enough, can get pretty high with a suitably high bonus.
You can also get a slick 30,000 point bonus by grabbing a life recovery heart with full life. There are a number of places that these pickups appear, though some are really well hidden. Still, with enough practice and stage memorization, you can get quite a high score pretty quickly.
Starting a game differently can also lead to a nice big buffer score. By selecting the prologue instead of the tutorial, a player can get nearly 100,000 points before the main game even starts, with a bit of skill.
All scores obtained in Mamorukun Curse are also uploaded to an online leaderboard so long as you're connected to the PSN and have all default game settings in place. This gives the game a pretty competitive feel and could be a big factor in bolstering players' resolve to try scoring as high as they can. So Mamorukun Curse has solid control, great game design, and simple but satisfying scoring. So how about the presentation? Well, with bright colors and pretty decent character design, Mamorukun's presentation has got a pretty good start. Granted, being a game that debuted on Naomi hardware, the in-game models are fairly low poly compared to, say, G-Rev's Xbox 360 conversion of Senko no Ronde, but this likely ensured that Mamorukun didn't suffer from the crippling slowdown of Under Defeat HD. Speaking of, while there is some slowdown here and there, it feels a lot more like the forced slowdown in many of Cave's games, rather than a hindrance.
The cute-up style works really well in Mamorukun. Everything has nice smooth edges in HD with decent texture, and the character portraits, not to mention the story sequence in the story mode, really pop with the extra resolution. Some of the textures feel just a tad chunky and unnatural, such as the shiny water effects on the Southern Temple stage. The animation is a bit on the stiff, robotic side though, but again, this is a trait typical of most polygonal shmups with Naomi roots, or so it seems. But overall, it's still pretty to look at.
The sound is absolutely awesome for the most part here as well. With an OST composed and arranged by Yosuke Asui, the music here is pretty much guaranteed to be super catchy, and as is the case with Eschatos and Under Defeat HD's New Order mode, it is.
The sound effects are mostly good too, but some character spirits have loud and irritating sound effects when in curse mode. Beniko is a notorious offender. Otherwise, most of the others are pretty tolerable.
Finally, just like Rising Star's release of Under Defeat HD, UFO's inclusion of all the DLC makes this game a pretty great value. Having all of the characters' well-designed alternate costumes, the 2 DLC exclusive Netherworld adventure courses, and the inclusion of Lucino and Noah right off the bat ensures no one is left out. And yes, Tate rotation for arcade mode is available.
Basically, Mamorukun Curse all comes together to form a fun, accessible, well-produced package with a good challenge and a solid learning curve that pretty much anyone can get into. But how does it stack up? Let's take a look.
The control here resembles Under Defeat very closely, and like the PS3 release of the former, benefits from a dual stick scheme. It's just more natural.
This game feels just a bit different than a game that scrolls, so it takes a bit of adjustment, but the dual stick setup is most recommended.
The Netherworld adventure courses can get downright harsh, but can be overcome with practice and patience. The arcade and story modes have a very good difficulty curve and decent rank up.
Lower ranking stages are a breeze, but as the rank increases, it can get pretty challenging to a novice.
Between arcade and story mode, there's enough here for high score seekers, but Netherworld Adventures offers hours upon hours of extra challenges.
Arcade mode is kinda short, but there is quite a bit of replay value in the extra modes in Netherworld Adventures.
Sometimes iffy in terms of textures and slightly robotic in the model department, these small hang-ups don't keep Mamorukun from looking great.
This is quite the saccharine cute-em-up, but that doesn't keep the game from throwing out some creepy designs.
The Yosuke Usui OST is great, which is just no surprise. Arranged tracks are also just as good.
Some of the voice samples here can be grating, but overall, the sound effects are not especially bad.
There isn't much in the line of ingenuity here though, save for some of the mechanics in the Netherworld Adventures. There's clear inspiration from both Under Defeat and Pocky Rocky here, both of which are completely unsurprising.
The multiple characters used as a livestock in the Netherworld Adventures is quite great. And the dual stick setup is a godsend for a game with this kind of playstyle. But because the core concepts are all stuff we've sort of seen before, ingenuity is kinda low.
Mamorukun Curse is a game I've wanted to get my hands on for a while, so when the North American release was announced, I knew I needed to play it, and it was definitely worth the wait. Fun, competitive, and even challenging, this is a game that, like Under Defeat before it, is one that I'll keep at least for the trophies and maybe a high score or two. Mamorukun Curse gets a 4 out of 5. Mamorukun Curse is available on the PlayStation Network for $19.99, which, when you factor in the inclusion of all the DLC, is a wicked good deal, especially compared to the physical copy prices, which are at minimum twice the price. A physical release in North America might have been nice, but hey, you take what you can get. Buy this one with confidence.